Hey Mizahar, this is Echelon again. I wanted to do another video for you guys. Again on again on the Zeltivan populace, specifically the NPCs, and how they kind of view the world. I talked about that a lot in the last video I did, but this one I wanted to ramble on a little bit more about how they view danger and violence, which I think is one of the more unique elements of Zeltivan populace versus the other communities in Mizahar. So, yeah. Zeltivans, I think, are viewed often as weak, especially by players and player characters. But I don't think that I would agree with that. Definitely compared to a lot of other cultures, they have a lot less defense, martial defense against the world. But they're not weak. They just follow a very specific philosophy. Actually, specific's the wrong word, because I think, if anything, their philosophy is a little underdeveloped compared to the rest of... No, not the rest of Mizahar, but compared to, say, our culture. We've had a lot of time to develop how we see morality, and Zeltiva is still fresh out of the Valtirian, and if that's how you say it, and so it's still kind of hammering things out, but it's, as Papa puts it, a enlightened culture. So what does that mean? Pretty much it means that they're not pacifists. They just believe that violence accomplishes very, very little in the grand scheme of things. That violence is a cycle, which is easy to fall into, and that's why they're resistant to entering that cycle, that they're resistant to engage in any sort of combat. This is a luxury that's given to them because of their place in the world, their physical place. They're protected from external threats by natural means. And they've been blessed with the knowledge to protect themselves via the sea, or the bay. So they don't need to worry about war. They don't need to worry about people really coming in and stealing their land. The only real threat they have is internal, governing themselves, governing the huge transient population they have. And that's the only time that any threat of violence really occurs in Zeltiva. And when the general populace is met with that threat, their first response is usually to run, because again, a lot of them don't have martial abilities, but those that can fight usually will. And something to keep in mind is that Zeltiva still has a much higher population of people that are combat capable than, say, our cultures. People still grow up in other places, or even in Zeltiva, they occasionally learn to fight as they grow up. Usually a little more on principle's sake, like learning to use the rapier, even though there's no such things as duels in Zeltiva to settle agreements. It's still kind of a classic weapon. And I'm sure there's a few others that haven't been developed yet, a few other traditions there. The most notable part of the society right now, which is martial capable, is probably the Martial Association, which my character Trent founded. And there was actually a lot of difficulties in doing that, both out of character and in character. Out of character, I had to think, well, Zeltiva isn't a combat-centered domain, and my purpose of putting the Martial Association in wasn't to make it that, but actually to demonstrate how how combat is viewed in the culture. The Martial Association, if you read the write-up on it, has a huge focus on philosophy, on why one fights, how when one fights, what they fight for. There's a specific request in the write-up saying that you put philosophy into the threads, that it's not just hack and slash, it's not just training, but the bulk of them, the bulk of the really good threads, is really about um, why someone would fight, when they would fight. So that's an out-of-character concern. In character, Trent had a lot of difficulty actually getting condoned to do this. Not by the leadership in Zeltiva, but actually the fellow citizens. See, the blacksmiths in Zeltiva are notorious for turning down people that are just requesting weapons, specifically sometimes armor, anything that might cause trouble. They have a good enough income working on architecture and other things, just for day-to-day use, that they don't need to make weapons. And even if they did, sacrificing their culture to forge weapons for some random buff guy that comes running through is not high on their priority list. In fact, Trent was turned down, and I think that Trent's pretty charismatic. So when I say that he got turned down when he first went and asked for weapons, it is kind of impressive. In fact, he was scoffed at and told that there was no way that he was going to, that the best blacksmith in all of Zeltiva was going to make weapons for his martial association, and said some very hurtful things about the association. And it was only when Maria, the Lord of Council, got on board with the idea and gave a personal recommendation was the Martial Association even possible. In fact, without that support, without that check of a very influential Zeltivan figure supporting the Martial Association, I don't think that anyone would actually smith weapons. So obviously weapons are outlawed in Zeltiva, but there's a lot of restrictions on them, and just wearing them, walking around with them, I think wins someone a different reaction from people. So if you walk around with a weapon, keep in mind that the general populace is probably going to wonder why you feel the need to walk around with weaponry, why you feel the need to run the risk of having to use that. So keep that in mind, that people are probably going to shy away from you or not want to do business with you if you're just walking around with a weapon on your belt. That's not to say they'll turn down your money or be rude to you. Zeltivans are generally very, very polite people, because they have the luxury to be that, unlike places like Sunbirth, which being polite will get you killed really fast. So, but they're not going to go out of their way to help somebody that clearly wants to help themselves to things, that seem to feel like they're in a culture where they need to be armed. The biggest protection Zeltiva has, which I personally don't think is much of a protection, but they do. The biggest protection they have is that their culture, by and large, does not promote violence, and thus there's not a lot of violence in it. Now, this season, specifically, Renmei came swooping in and started murdering people in the streets and spreading disease, and there was a lot of violence, which the Zeltivans had to deal with, and they really didn't know how to do this because their culture isn't really programmed to do that. So a lot of, especially transients and player characters, went to go take up arms and fight this new threat, realizing how weak Zeltiva is and how they have to protect it. But if you really want to pay attention to how the NPCs reacted to it, the NPCs that were born and raised in Zeltiva, most of them didn't take up arms, most of them didn't join the Martial Association, most of them didn't join the Wave Guard, most of them didn't go sharpen up their blades at home, most of them didn't even go buy weapons, because what they really want, what they're really waiting for, is a solution to come along that doesn't involve continuing violence, escalating the violence. And whether that's possible or not is completely, absolutely up to the player characters in the following seasons, and how they go about that. I could very easily see the Zeltivan society culture shifting, adopting more violent outlook depending on how the player characters treat the city in the upcoming seasons. But it's just as possible that they'll break the cycle and they'll propagate it. So I look forward to seeing how that turns out. For now, just remember that Zeltivans like to avoid violence when they can. They shy away from weapons, and they try to use their minds, their philosophies, their sociology, their politics, everything to get themselves around violence, to speak to the people that are responsible for it and get them to back down, to come to agreements, to use money, to use charisma, to use common sense, not so common sense, to avoid violence whenever they can, because there's no Zeltivan-born NPC anyway that wants to live in a world of violence. And if they could put this shroud of peace over all of Mizahar, they would. So keep that in mind, guys, when you're throwing random little faceless, nameless NPCs into your threads in the future. That Zeltivans are smart. Most of them are much better educated than anyone else in Mizahar, and they're not just going to run and flee and cower in the corner at the slightest touch of a violent person, at the intimidating words. Instead, they're going to stand up and fight the violence in the only way that they think will really help, and that's going to be with words. It's going to be with steadfast resolve and intellect. So play it smart, Zeltiva. And I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for listening.